Hi everyone, this is Terry Campbell with Johnson Insurance and another episode of Outside the Box. And today I have a very special guest that I'm honored to have. Now, he needs no introduction. If anybody's been in this industry more than 5 minutes, they know who he is. He has tons of accolades. He's done so many things in the self-storage and legal world. He's also an accomplished author. But I'm still going to introduce him because somebody may have just now got into the self-storage industry. But I'm honored to have Scott Zucker with me today to talk about insurance. Scott, welcome.
Thanks, Terry. Wonderful to be with you. We were just reminiscing a minute ago. I think we've known each other a very long time in this industry, and it's good to always cross paths with you and to work with you and your company on trying to help people.
I appreciate it, and likewise, it's always great to see you and talk with you and have you on here. I had reached out to Scott probably 6-8 weeks ago and about a particular insurance coverage that I hear more about, and asked him if he would join us and have some conversation. And he said, well, why don't we just do an insurance checkup? Let's talk about all the types of insurance and make sure that people are considering these things. And I was telling Scott right before we got on here that as an insurance agency, as an agent, sometimes when you talk to folks, we try to be advisors, but sometimes when we're talking to folks, they think we're just trying to sell them something. We're just trying to sell them another line of insurance. So I think that coming from him and his perspective, it might make more sense, and people may be more open to having conversations about these coverages and things. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. We'll talk through some of the coverages and some other topics that we have here that would be interesting or of importance to you as an owner to protect your investments and protect yourself, your family, your legacy. There's a lot more to it, but we'll just dive in and start talking about the different coverages. We kind of have a list. What normally people think about when they're thinking about insurance is like your property insurance or your general liability. Those are the two major things, but there are several others, and I'm going to ask Scott to chime in on those as well, all of them. But property coverages, you can usually put a number on it. You can usually put a number on what property coverage is based on replacement costs. But one of the things you can't really put a number on is general liability. So, Scott, if you want to kind of start off on those two things, and we'll sort of hop into the others as we go.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, and you're right. I mean, the perspective of a conversation like this is to give advice to self-storage operators, to let them think about where they stand in terms of their insurance protection. And I sort of always call this, what's it going to take for you to put your head on the pillow at night and sleep and not worry? Because no matter how prepared you are, things happen in every business, and no matter how well you have prepared, the risk is there. And that's the beauty about insurance. And I know it's expensive, and I know that you finish out a year and nothing's happened and your loss ratio is 0, and you go, gosh, why did I pay for that insurance? I'm bulletproof. Nothing's going to happen. And then you see, then the next shoe drops. So it's such an important conversation to have, and I feel like I've been in the trenches with operators over these last 40 years to know what they should be prepared for in terms of the insurance, and so I feel like I can speak about some of these issues, and they're all, I hate to say it, they're unfortunate stories. There's situations where you almost can't believe that this has happened, and you call your advisor and you ask the question, do I have insurance for this? And when they say yes, you just take that deep breath of comfort, knowing that, oh, I was smart enough to ask about this, or my advisor was smart enough to tell me about this. Thank God we have this, and there will be another day. Because you never want to bet the farm on the fact that it's not going to happen. You got to prepare yourself that it is. And that's just sort of the background for this conversation, why I think it's so important. So general liability. I come from the perspective, especially if we put this in the box of self-storage, that this is a landlord that has tenants It also invites people to come onto its property, and by doing that, they assume a tremendous amount of liability for safety and security for those tenants and for their invitees. Other than somebody who climbs the fence at 2 in the morning, who's a trespasser, the law presumes an obligation of ordinary care and protection from a landlord. And so if somebody gets injured on your property, and this happens every day in many different instances, the opportunity is to turn to a general liability coverage for injury or for property damage. And then you ask the question, how much? It's really a question of how much will it help you to sleep at night, knowing that if something happens, your net worth would not be subject to risk based upon the occurrence that happened on the property. So what do you tell your customers? I mean, how do you evaluate how much is enough for GL?
Well, we always recommend a minimum of 1 million. And like you said it at the beginning, there is what's going to help you sleep at night, because you may never ever use it. You may never use it, but when you do, when something happens, you're going to feel so good about the fact that you actually had that coverage in place. We say minimum 1. I recommend 1 and 2 minimum. 2 and 4 is more of a comfort zone. Because I mean, for me personally, I have a $2 million umbrella for me personally.
Yeah.
Just because it makes me sleep better at night.
Yeah, and that's the whole concept behind it. Let's hope we never have to use it. It's a cost of business. It's a deductible expense. I mean, it is what you have to do to maintain your company, and the risks are there, especially in the context of a self-storage operator inviting people onto its property. I mean, we talk a lot about the rental agreements having exclusions with regard to the loss of the goods that are stored in the unit. Separate topic from the fact that people are coming onto the property, and I hate to tell these stories about shootings that have happened on the property, altercations that have happened on the property, slips and falls that have happened on the property, cuts and injuries relating to the metal that's exposed on the property. It's like a little of everything. Now, I get this question a lot. Okay, let's say that a crime occurs on our property that we're not responsible for. Like we did not assist a person to come in and commit domestic relations assault on our property, but it happens at self-storage. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes even the use of self-storage arises from a domestic situation, right? The challenge is the claims regarding the security that's in place, the foreseeability of the operator with regard to incidents that may have arose before that they knew about but didn't rise to the level of acknowledgement to the police or additional security. The fear of being questioned about the operator's behavior as a result of these events that happen on their property put the operator in defensive mode, and they may say, look, there's no way I would have known, there's nothing I could have done. It doesn't exclude you from the potential risk of liability from the plaintiff's side as to a claim. And a GL policy will include, or should include, a cost of defense piece to it, and therefore you know that you will get a legitimate defense even if you did nothing wrong. But the cost, look, lawyers cost money, and even if the insurance, all they do is defend you to avoid the claim, then it's money well spent.
Yep. And another topic that could be a whole nother webinar easily is risk management in conjunction with the GL, making sure that you're doing things to mitigate any risk that could cause those GL claims to happen.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, you've got a list here. I mean, I have to joke when I think about all of the sort of lists of things on your checkup. This is like going to the doctor. I was going to name a particular type of doctor, but I was just like going to the doctor, and let's go through it. Property with wind.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and again, this is where, Terry, your advice, in the industry can be helpful to understand the wind pools that are available through states when insurance by itself doesn't have certain protection for wind based upon the location of the properties. I mean, you and I have been at this long enough. We've seen some hurricanes that we can't believe, and we know why there's exclusions with regard to wind. So what are you finding for solutions for your customers on wind coverage in these pools?
Well, if it's not available except through a pool, they don't have much of an option other than there's also what they call parametric insurance out there that you can use in really, really bad situations. We've seen it. We have access to it. The only problem is we've seen it's very, very expensive, and I've just seen cases where especially the last few years, it's gone up so much that it actually kills deals. It keeps deals from happening, and then some people end up self-insuring just because they can't get it. It's not that they don't want to get it or it's too expensive. They can't. We haven't seen that many of those, but we've seen some that are just so cost prohibitive. We talk to every carrier that we can that's a possible potential answer to the situation, and we just present it to the owner. Look, here, and especially a lot of times that's in acquisitions, because if you've owned the facility for years and years and years and you've had coverage, and sometimes you can kind of get grandfathered in if you've had no losses and you're not reporting claims every time you turn around. But if it's an acquisition and you're a whole new animal, kind of starts over. That's where we see a lot of times that it's getting to where it doesn't pencil. I mean, we saw a real small facility in an area in Florida right on the water. And the facility, I think the liability, the property and casualty without wind was probably 8 or 10,000, but it was like 25,000 for wind. So it's just really expensive, and we just do our best to try to shop it for them and find the best way, the best options that are out there, and present it to them. And some of them they're self-insured.
Yeah. And it's that sort of analysis of the cost versus risk that everybody's going to go through. If there's a way around it, I know you guys will find a solution for them. Sometimes there is no solution, but because it is tough to feel bad for insurance companies sometimes that they don't take on this risk, no matter what you could pay for it. We've seen some incredible losses in the billions, I know, for the insurance companies over the last few years on some of these fires. The fact that it comes down and seeps down into our own insurance costs and premiums is a tough thing to swallow, but it is what it is.
It is, and I've actually done separate podcasts, though. This is, so many folks think that insurance carriers are just crooks and they're trying to, get as much as they can. And the fact is, it's like, when I was in banking, the banks had to keep a certain amount of cash reserves at all times, required by the federal government. Insurance companies are the same way. They have certain kind of cash reserves they have to keep on hand, and the government requires that. And they have no way to make those cash reserves except through premiums. So it's they're kind of in the middle. Some people, and I used to be one of those until I understood that. I say, hey, the insurance companies are just trying to rip us off. But it's not. I mean, like you said, they've paid out billions, if not hundreds of billions in claims, and it's eroded their cash reserves that they are required to have by the federal government.
So you've got on this list environmental pollution. I assume, well, there's lots of different types of that. I don't know if that's in the context of hazardous contents.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, from the perspective of a self-storage operator, again, you're renting the space without knowledge of the inventory of the space. And unfortunately, there are instances where the unit is opened primarily out of a default or abandonment, and the property that's left in the space needs to be properly cleaned out. And that is typically an uninsured claim unless you have the hazardous contents coverage, this pollution coverage. And at least it will cover some of the expense. But I will tell you that the third-party vendors that do hazardous contents clean-out are very expensive. So I would absolutely keep this on the list for a coverage for a self-storage operator because of the unique nature of not knowing what's in the unit. If you were a warehouseman and you would know that the barrels being stored in your unit could be removed because it's a non-appropriate use, and you have the ability to decide, what's stored and what's not stored. But in self-storage, you have no idea what's stored, and having the coverage to deal with potential cleanups, I've seen it happen. I mean, including abandoned tires, eroded tanks, solvents and flammables that are poured on the material, on the floor. I don't see how you get around from it. So I like it on the list. I'm an advocate for it being on the list.
And we used to hear a lot about was meth labs, and
Yeah.
there's tremendous cleanups with that sometimes that are so costly that you don't hear much about that anymore. But there's always that, like you said, you don't know what's there, so there's always that risk.
Well, and I would do a big red flashing note to operators that they cannot handle some of these cleanups themselves, because the inappropriate disposal of the contaminants puts the operator in liability under EPA laws, and it's just, you escape maybe the cost of cleanup, but you assume the liability of the improper dump, and it's just not worth it, and I wouldn't want anyone to put themselves in that position. There's too much exposure there with that cost. So you have one EPLI, Employee Practices Liability, and I will tell you that I am a big advocate of that now, as more and more of these management companies grow, and third-party management companies especially. Well, it's true for all operators, but I've seen this in the third-party management side with their employees on site. We all think we know our employees and control our employees and manage and train our employees, but things happen, and when an employee acts to the detriment of their company, and you look for insurance to defend you on their employee acts, and you don't have EPLI, it can be very costly. So what's your experience with the EPLI coverages? Are people taking them?
Well, a lot of the coverages that we have, believe it or not, they're remote, and they really don't have employees.
Okay.
I mean, so there is some folks that are taking it, and definitely if there's a management company back. Actually, when I was with the management company, that was a focus for us.
Yeah.
Is to make sure that we had it. So that's a good point you make, but I think when you get the one-offs, again, they got to understand what the risks are and what it could cost them, because you're like, I'm not worried about that. I have great employees, or I'm a great boss, or things like that. I'm not going to have to worry about it. But it doesn't take but one time.
Yeah, and we see it in different contexts with regard to hostile work environment, sexual harassment, any sort of dispute between a manager and a tenant can result in a claim against that employee and against the company based upon the employee's actions. Again, whether or not they actually did anything wrong or not, it's the fact that a lawsuit or claim can be brought, and you want your insurance company to have coverage for the allegation that's being brought. And to the extent that it applies to your employees and their practices, you have to have the specialized coverage, or you'll get denied on a coverage claim. So I like that one on the list. So the next two are really my ultimate favorites, and very unique to self-storage: customer goods legal liability and sale and disposal coverage. I would call them the two unique, special, important pieces of an insurance package for a self-storage operator, because they are unique to our operations as self-storage operators. This goes back, actually, Terry, it was the first article I ever wrote in self-storage. This goes back to, I'm afraid to say this goes back to 1989, where I was published in the Messenger magazine. And it was an article about a case that came out that denied coverage for a customer's loss of its property at a self-storage facility and the insurance company had denied coverage because the insurance company's position is that it only insured the operator and its property, that because the self-storage operator did not have care, custody, or control of the tenant's goods, they were not included in the operator's owner's coverage for loss or damage. And that makes a lot of sense. We exclude ourselves from having any care, custody, or control of our tenant's goods. So if something happens to those goods, we would not have coverage from our insurance company for a defense relating to the loss or damage or for payment for that property. Having this specialized customer goods legal liability provides a backstop for an operator, both for defense costs brought by a tenant claiming loss or damage to their goods, and also a reservoir of payment for that claim if in fact the owner's been negligent in allowing that property to be lost or damaged. But a regular GL policy will not cover claims relating to the tenant's property. So in self-storage, you are not a self-storage operator if you don't have customer goods legal liability. You just can't be, because it's such a unique coverage because of the nature of what we're doing as a self-storage operator. Same with sale and disposal. Very unique statutory entitlement for a self-storage operator to be able to sell a tenant's goods via lien over the goods that are stored, the foreclosure of the collateral for non-payment of rent. But the tenant can sue for their sale of their property, even if you do it perfectly. There's a risk of sale based upon the anger and disappointment of the tenant's property that's disposed of. So sale and disposal insurance is to defend you whether you've done it perfectly or whether you made a mistake arising from the timeline or notices that are required by the state law that governs the foreclosure. Very unique, specific coverages for self-storage. I'd love to talk to you about the fact, I hope you don't ever have any trouble with an operator when you're talking about sale and disposal and customer goods legal liability.
You shouldn't, because we push it, and it's like you said, you're not really a self-storage owner if you don't have those. And something that I explain to people, I give them anecdotal incidences when I was at the management company. I mean, I'm still part owner of 11 locations now, so I still see it through their lens, is that no matter if you do it right, if you do everything per the letter, doesn't matter, they're going to be mad, and they're going to try to take you to court. They're going to threaten to sue you. They will sue you for no, they won't win, but a lot of them have figured out that, hey, they'll give me $5,000 to go away, right, instead of spending the money to defend themselves. And what kills me is they sign an agreement that says $5,000, the most I'll put in here. They buy their tenant insurance or tenant protection for $2,000. To me, that's just declaring I only have $2,000 worth of stuff in there, and then they want to sue you for $20,000. So definitely a coverage you need, just mostly for the legal cost, because even if there is an award given through the courts, you're going to probably be spending a lot more on legal than you are on the actual award.
Yeah, I will tell you, this risk has become elevated with the use of AI. I have seen pro se tenant complaints now being drafted through AI, which is actually pretty amazing. But they can be claims arising for loss or damage to the tenant's goods that could be hundreds of pages. Wow. In claim argument and assertions. It has changed the playing field. I don't want to say it's leveled the playing field, but it's changed the playing field, that a lot of these claims that otherwise could be easily disposed of as frivolous have to now go through a process of analysis. Instead of being 1 page long, it's 100 pages long. It takes a lot longer for the courts to analyze these cases, and therefore the expense of defense goes up. So I so urge my clients to have the proper customer goods legal liability and sale and disposal coverages, just because of this new age of AI law.
That is some great ammo for us to use with customers on
Yeah.
why
It's true.
they need that
Yeah.
coverage. That's scary. That's a little bit scary.
It's a lot scary these days. I will tell you, I'm probably, and I've been doing this almost 40 years, I'm busier now than I've ever been just swatting away claims that are created through AI.
Wow.
Even lawyers who are using AI to bolster their claims with new assertions, phraseology, allegations. I wish all of them were hallucinations, but they're not. And it's coming at everybody. Businesses will be suffering as a result of the use of AI in law.
Wow.
So
Up to this point in this podcast, that if for no other reason, that is a great point. One of the best ones that I have not heard yet. And I appreciate you mentioning that. That's
yeah,
awesome.
you got to be on the front line. That's why I say I feel like I've been in the trenches with operators long enough to know that these are danger signs.
Wow.
Well, let's talk about cyber.
Yes.
The next one on your list. Here we go again. This is a new age.
Yeah.
I laughed. I did a program recently at a conference where I talked about the use of a firewall in the old days used to be the locked file cabinet, right? If you were a good operator, you put all your leases, your copies of your leases, your pink, white, or yellow copy of the paper, the carbon paper. You took your copy and you put it in the file cabinet under the tenant's name, and gosh, you locked it, Davey. That was your good job of defense. These days, your firewalls are integrated computer cloud systems with this defense and that defense, and everything's electronic, more easily adaptable to hacking, to recovery, to copying. I mean, it's a whole new world we're in. And self-storage, which used to be the simple rental of space at a local facility, has become this large operation using a lot of technology, and opening that up to the risk of breach, of theft, of hack, of failure. It opens up the liability to an operator differently than it ever has before, and that's why I've been an advocate for cyber liability insurance, because your general liability insurance is typically not going to cover claims that arise from data breach or cyber infestation. So tell us what's your recommendation on the cyber world these days?
Oh, I definitely recommend. Here's one of the things, I don't mean to be a hot potato here, but here's something I wanted your take on. I hear clients all the time that when I bring it up and mention it and give some examples, they say, well, I have a self-storage management software. If something happens, it's their problem. Legally, they're responsible. What would you say to that?
Well, depending upon how the breach occurred, they may be right, and there may be appropriate indemnifications in those contracts. But I can also tell you there's limitations of liability in those contracts. So even though the software company may assume certain responsibilities associated with the breach, there are limits. And if an operator does not have its own insurance, they expose themselves to direct liability for those risks. And this is head on the pillow, sleep at night sort of question. In these days where your data is available on the cloud, it is not locked in your file cabinet in a locked office, and you can feel comfortable that you have limited control to it. There is a risk that something could happen to it. There's a data breach could be a manager copying down a credit card number in an office and going to buy a TV at Walmart. That's a breach too. So there's a lot of exposure to the information that's out there. There's liability associated now under many of these state laws with regard to how you use your data and how you've gotten consent to use the data and whether you've properly modified your data of your customers, deleted it when they've requested, modified it or changed it or updated it when requested. There's the arrows are flying everywhere. There's no way that as a lawyer I can advise a client to prepare for every risk that's coming in this situation. Every agreement's going to have its holes or certain gray interpretation of indemnification and responsibility. My sense is the only way to create a stopgap to the risk of assets of the company is to have insurance for those risks and to make sure you have the proper coverages so that you wouldn't just have a regular CGL policy and go, oh, I'm sure that covers a cyber risk. Well, it doesn't. I mean, you guys educate your operators to understand that there's separate additional addendums needed for different coverages. It's just the way the system works.
Yep. And some of the carriers provide, it will be shown as an item they provide as a token, $10,000 coverage. I mean, what's that really going to do if you actually have a cyber issue? And like I said, we recommend it. I always recommend that they consider it, that let us quote it. If they don't want to, it's part of our application process. Do you want cyber insurance? And if they check no, then we've taken ourselves off the hook because we don't want to have an E&O issue because we didn't bring it up or mention it or even ask them. So we do for us. But I just think it's so important because of all of the, like you said, the landscape has changed so much and there's so much technology and so many opportunities for that sort of thing to happen that overnight you could be ruined.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a protection philosophy for your business that everyone's worked so hard to create, invested so much, assumed financial liability with regard to their loans, built based upon the hope that their tenants will be good tenants. There's a lot of great value and opportunity in this industry, but there is risk like in every industry. Let's talk about the loss of income one that's next on your list. It is disappointing to see sometimes when there is a loss at a facility from a fire, from a storm, whatever it may be that knocks out a particular building, and the insurance is at the ready to repair the building, but it takes time. You've got to empty out your tenants that are there. You've lost that rental. You've got to repair the building, which takes time. And then you've got to, and this is the part that people don't think about ahead of time, then you've got to re-rent that space to derive the same level of income that you had before the loss occurred. And right. I know how hard it is and how long it takes to ramp up occupancy at facilities. I mean, we're struggling now with some occupancy demand issues in our industry. If you do not insure yourself for the loss of income arising from a claim that would give you the level of income measured by your past reporting to ramp up how long it would take for you to get back to where you were within a period of time, then you're not thinking ahead to understand the full extent of loss or damage at your property. Yep. So I don't know what you recommend on loss of use and loss of income, but I'm sure you have some measuring sticks of what you suggest to your customers.
Yeah, we're going to suggest minimum of 12 months. If we can get more, we want to do that because you have a very good point that you've got to re-rent those units, and in some cases, something else people don't really think about is, okay, I just lost part of my market. It doesn't exist because the stuff they needed to store is gone. It's not just, I got to re-rent, but the people I was renting to, now they don't have these things anymore. Eventually they'll accumulate them and they'll need it again, but it takes time. I mean, in a good market, when you're doing things right, it takes a while to lease up to where you're stable. But when you do that, and you actually lose that. So, I like to have a lot more than a year if possible, but minimum of a year is what we'd look for.
You've got workers' comp on this list. It's sort of the obvious. I mean, there are certain exceptions for small companies under a certain amount to be excluded from workers' comp. I'm an advocate of the workers' comp system with respect to the way it protects the employee and the employer under these set guidelines of coverage for losses and insurability. I mean, in certain instances, there's no question. It's just that it's what you have to do, and if you have an exemption that would give you the out, you may still choose to do it. And maybe that's another question for you, Terry. What do you advise a small family operator that has less than 5 employees about the choice of workers' comp?
Well, overall, it's relatively cheap. It's relatively inexpensive. So, we recommend that you consider it strongly, regardless. If it's family or if it's only a few people or whatever. It is. From what I've seen, I would call it very inexpensive compared to a lot of the rest of them. So again, just another one of those head on the pillow, sleep better at night sort of thing. So if it's a family-owned thing and you don't want to spend the few bucks on it to do it, then that's your decision. But we recommend you strongly consider it. All the circumstances that could potentially happen there.
Well, and it goes back to the same thing I said earlier about people being on a self-storage property. There are risks of injury on a self-storage property. It's not isolated from. Look, we've seen, as crazy as some of these stories are, people fall out of golf carts. The rolling doors hitting people on their heads.
Yep, exactly.
Exposed metal cutting people. There being a lot of traffic on the asphalt and maybe some issues concerning trips and falls. And the people that are listening to this program, if they're self-storage operators, they could list 20 more incidences that have happened on their property for which it's either a workers' comp claim or a tenant injury claim. So it's just a reality of operating a real estate location and having people on it. It's the type of insurance that you have to assume that there's a risk that somebody could get injured, and that's why you need it. These last 3, I'm going to put into a bucket: the flood, earthquake, and subsidence risks. The recognition that a typical coverage does not have these coverage items included. Certainly, if you're in earthquake-prone areas, or there's been previous flooding in particular areas, or you're not in a flood zone. There's all these different elements relating to whether these coverages exist or don't exist in your policy. This is where it comes back to, I know, Terry, you're not selling people on this, you're educating people on this. You need to talk to them about their location and the unique aspects of their property. So let's go back to the flood thing, because I had this come up recently with the floods in Asheville, and the horrible stories relating to operators that were not in floodplains but had flood damage as a result of the rains. Yep. And clearly there's an atmospheric reality that's happening in our world that this is becoming more and more of a phenomenon. What's your ability to get operators flood insurance even outside of the flood zones?
You can get, here's our take. This is what we like to tell people. Even if the map doesn't say you're in a flood zone, if it rains where you are, you can consider it a flood zone. You gave the exact example. There are so many places in western North Carolina that were not in a flood zone, according to the map. Yeah. But they got hit bad, and some of them lost everything, and they hadn't. And so we recommend you consider it because it's inexpensive if you're not in a flood zone on the map. So it's not very expensive. And this is what I like to say, if you're anywhere close to a flood zone on the map, use that as an example of what might happen and consider it and look at it. And if it's cheap, and again, if you're not in the flood zone, it's relatively inexpensive. It's a lot less expensive than if you are in the flood zone. We're working with one right now that has, I think, 12 buildings in a flood zone, and you got to have a flood policy for each and every individual building, and it can get so expensive the deal won't work anymore. But that's what I like to say. If it rains where you're at, you are in a potential flood zone. Yeah. But if you're anywhere near the flood zones, just consider it, because that's a great example of what can happen. Even here where I live in Mebane, North Carolina, between Greensboro and Raleigh, July 4th last year, we had there was a tropical storm, Chantal, sat over us for 10 hours. And I think we got like 10 inches plus of rain. that day, areas that are not in a flood zone were flooded. I mean, there were so many roads washed out. Even our water treatment system here, luckily I have a well, I have two wells, so it didn't affect me, but it affected my kids who live nearby. The water treatment center was underwater. This town was without water for I forgot how long, just because, they weren't necessarily in a flood zone, but you see the havoc it can reap. So consider it if you're close, at least consider it if you're close to a flood zone.
Will you be able to assist your customers with the application for government flood coverage?
Yeah, we help. We take care of the flood insurance for a lot of folks. We work with them on getting the policies, even if it's through the government or through individual independent companies that do it as well. So we can do both. That's
great. Yeah, look, I mean, the topic of insurance and coverages, we could. I know you and I could talk about this forever.
Yes.
Just to kind of circle back, I mean, whether it's self-storage, whether you're doing boat and RV storage, which is big for operators now, whether these are remote facilities or / unmanned facilities, hub and spoke properties. I mean, it doesn't really change my answer about understanding the responsibility that a self-storage operator has to think about its insurance coverages for its business operations, and to have, like you say, this sort of annual healthy checkup to look at its coverages and maybe move the needles on certain things based upon how the business is operating. Maybe if they've enhanced the camera system and the gate access system, maybe you can move the needle down on customer goods legal liability claims relating to theft, and maybe you move the needle up on the flood insurance that you had previously. Working with a good advisor like you guys to sit down and really talk about the business and how it's been working and what works for that property is a really healthy exercise. And they shouldn't feel as if they're being sold something.
Right.
They really should look at it as an opportunity. Maybe I'll call it for you guys free advice compared to me. If they call me, I'm billing them. If they call you, you've got an upside relationship maybe that you end up providing them the product that they need.
Right. And that's what we do every day, and we have these conversations. We want to understand their business. We want to understand their thought process. We want to understand, is the bank requiring you to do these things? Are you looking at insurance as a necessary evil or part of your business plan? We want to understand where you're coming from, what's important to you. It's because we have people obviously on both ends of the spectrum. We just took over a large portfolio recently that it was huge. It was huge, and they had I'm not going to say the right thought process. They had the thought process of I have a huge value here in this portfolio. I want to protect it. I want to protect it in all the ways that I can that makes sense. They're not going to necessarily buy every single insurance that's out there because they're large enough. They have good cash flow. There's certain things they can absorb, and it makes sense. Thinking about things like deductibles. I want a bigger deductible because I'm not going to turn them in. So there's so many things that come into play that we need to have the conversation about. Understand how you think, what you're looking at, how you're looking at things, and then like you said, there are levers that you can move, and that's what we want to know and what we want to help do.
Well, I hope this has been helpful. I think it's great that you offer this to folks to listen in and be part of this conversation, be thinking about their operations and what's best for them. And I'm always happy to be a resource, and I certainly know where to send them if they have questions as well.
Awesome. Well, Scott, again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on here. How much it's an honor to have you on here anytime that we get to do this. And again, we go back a long ways. I consider you a friend, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Outside the Box. Thanks, and have a great day. All right.